Hello and welcome everyone, this is Calebovitsch coming to you live with another episode of Deck Check. And today we will be talking about one of my favorite subjects in Eternal Card Game, and that is milling! And milling is the art of decking your opponent or just discarding their whole deck to their void and making them lose that way. I will be talking obviously about a card from the newest campaign, Promises by Firelight, called the Tome of Horrors. That is a great inclusion in many ways, so let's get to the deck list now. And here you can see the deck list for the Expedition format called Millstome. That is a play on card names going back to good old Magic the Gathering Millstone. An artifact that for 2 mana and tapping it, you were able to discard the top 2 cards of the opponent's deck to their graveyard, not void, graveyard. So here, milling and the newest edition from Promises by Firelight called the Tome of Horrors. That's where the name Millstome comes from. Now, the art of war, or at least the art of milling in Eternal Card Game, is a very interesting one. I mean, Direwolf over time has introduced almost one card in each new expansion or campaign that allowed you to discard cards from the top of your opponent's deck. Lately, in the Flame of Zalta and Promises by Firelight, there have been more than 1 card per expansion, especially that Mill Feln is a thing even in draft in the 7.0 and 7.5 draft format. But milling is an interesting concept, and I will talk to you about my unified theory of milling in Eternal. Well, the main difference between winning via damage or winning via milling in a card game, such as this one, is that instead of dealing 25 points of damage, you are dealing 75 points of card damage, or rather fewer than that, because the opponent is taking 1 card damage each turn. But so far, usually the fact that you are milling the opponent doesn't achieve anything more than just allowing you to get closer and closer to decking them. Although in the last couple of expansions there have been some cards that trigger in a way when the opponent discards their cards, or get better when the opponent discards their cards, and right now with the addition of Tome of Horrors that is even better. That makes everything click into place, almost literally. So far cards like Malaise, the player of your choice discards the top 6 cards of their deck. This card could have had one of 2 implementations. One, you could be milling yourself for 6 cards if you're running a Reanimator or a otherwise self-mill deck, that you need some stuff in your void because stuff works better when it's in your void. Or you can just mill the opponent for 6, which is like dealing 6 card damage to them, which is much more than you would have on a 2-cost spell that just dealt damage to the opponent. It would be like 2 or 3, maybe, if you're lucky. Like a 1-cost Char or a 1-cost Torch. And that's about it. So Malaise in and of itself doesn't do much, even for your milling strategies and synergies, but this one is quite important to some of the build-arounds, and I will get to that in a moment. But let me talk about Tome of Horrors first, because this is the newest edition, and you might not know what this card is about, especially if you have not bought the campaign or played through the campaign yet. Okay, so this is a 2-cost Feln relic, which is quite cheap, and you don't want expensive relics in a mill deck because you want to start as early as possible. And this one has 2 abilities. One of them is when one of your units deals damage, the enemy player discards that many cards from the top of their deck. The other one is once per turn you may pay 4 to draw the top card of the enemy player's deck. And these are these are quite different in what they do. The second one, the more obvious one, lets you pilfer a card from your opponent once per turn. And historically, when I was playing mill decks in Eternal, a lot of the time I had problems with generating any sorts of card advantage, because you are losing cards, you are burning cards such as Malaise or Vicious Rumors if you're not warping it, just to mill some cards from your opponent's deck. While this one, just aside from the fact that it helps you, is cheap and helps you mill your opponent from the get-go almost, also allows you to start refilling your hand, even with cards that do not synergize with your deck, but usually are just pieces of removal or just roadblocks or power, which you might need for cards like Mournful Deathcap, etc., etc. So for most of the cards that I will explain right now, I will just reference what they do when Tome of Horrors is in play. And let me start with a 1-cost Shadow Elf called Bloodseeker, a 2/3 that you might have seen in other of my videos, especially for Expedition. It says, at the end of your turn, Bloodseeker deals 1 damage to you, and it has +2/+2 for each player with 10 or more cards in their void. Now, if you have Tome of Horrors in play, this card is even more amazing than it used to be. Because, hypothetically, turn 1, you play Bloodseeker. Turn 2, you play Tome of Horrors. Then you attack with Bloodseeker, you mill the opponent for 2, but also, when at the end of your turn, Bloodseeker deals 1 damage to you, that point of damage also makes your opponent mill a card. So you have already milled 3 cards from their deck, and in a moment, Bloodseeker will become a 4/5 that mills 4+1 cards each turn when it attacks or blocks, because Tome of Horror says units dealing damage. It can be dealing damage to the opponent, it can be dealing damage to the opponent's minions, units, or it can be when you are blocking with your units. So there is that. So this has been a card that I might have included in a mill deck because it is a 1-cost 4/5 more often than not, but also the clause of dealing 1 damage to you is pushing that milling even further. So we are turning a downside into an upside, and that is what you need to do to build great decks from time to time. I'm not saying this is a great deck, by the way. This is just a beginning step, I would say, to achieving greatness in milling in Expedition, but this is a good place to start for sure. Now next up we have Dream Snatcher, a 2-cost double Shadow Radiant with Lifesteal, a 2/3 unit, that says when the enemy player discards a non-power card, Dream Snatcher gets +1 attack, and ultimate you can pay 10 to make the enemy player discard the top 15 cards of their deck. Now, more often than not you will not use the ultimate ability on this one, especially in a rather mid-range / aggressive mill variant. But let's think for a moment about the synergy of Dream Snatcher and Tome of Horrors once again. So this is a 2/3. You attack with it, you have Tome of Horrors in play, you mill the opponent for 2 cards. Tome of Horrors triggers, you mill the opponent for 2 cards, possibly non-power cards. Dream Snatcher grows bigger. So next time it attacks, it mills even more cards from your opponent. It can get even bigger, etc., etc. So this one is a unit the opponent has to stop at all costs. Also lifesteal, also good defensive stats, so everything you want on a unit. Next up we have my personal favorite, Mournful Deathcap, a 2-cost double Shadow Sporefolk that on empowerment, which means each time a power card comes into play on your side of the board, the enemy player discards the top 3 cards of their deck. This is not an aggressive card, but it is a constant source of milling, especially with Tome of Horrors. Now, the synergy of Mournful Deathcap with Tome of Horrors is one of the few ones that comes from the second part of this card that says once per turn you may pay 4 to draw the top card of the enemy player's deck, and here you want that to be power, usually. Next up we have 4 copies of Blightpest Smuggler, a 1/4 Feln Berserking Merchant that swaps a card from your hand with the black market, and I'm gonna get to the black market at the end of this explanation. Next up we have Sunset Priest, a 3-cost 3/3 elf cultist that on summon makes each player discard the top 3 cards of their deck. So this is a slightly better effect than, for example, a Spy Feeder that only discards the top 2 cards of the opponent's deck. Also makes your void slightly bigger, so it is much more possible for your Bloodseeker to be bigger because you have at least 10 cards in your void. And also each time when it attacks for 3 or blocks for 3. So with Tome of Horrors it mills for additional 3 cards each turn. And that's not the good part yet. We are just getting to the good part. And the first one is Heartstopper. It is a 4-cost double shadow 3/4 flying nightmare that says the first time the enemy player discards a card each turn, draw it. So this is like the Pilfer effect from Tome of Horrors. And this one usually, well, the stat line is good. It's a 3/4 flyer for 4, but mill decks so far have not been that aggressive. They were mostly control decks, at least my take on them. And we're usually winning by milling, not by damage. This one, this deck can do one or the other. It just matters it just depends on the situation. Now for this one, you usually needed another card in play or in hand to mill the opponents for some cards, so you could take at least one of them. One of them. But right now, if you have Tome of Horrors in play and you have Heartstopper in play without any other mill effects, you just attack with your Heartstopper. It is a 3/4. It doesn't need to deal damage to the opponent. It just needs to deal damage. And when it does, you mill the opponent for 3 cards and you get the first one of them. So this is also fueling this one. Now, the last interaction is with Monsieur Kaido Shadowstep. And this card is just crazy in what it does. It is a 4-cost primal double shadow 2/7 unseen that says when any player discards a card, kindly deals 1 damage to himself. And Mastery 13, the enemy player discards each card in their deck that shares a name with a card in their void. Now, when it comes to the interaction between Tome of Horrors and Kaido Shadowstep, it is a very delicate one because Kaido Shadowstep, let's say he attacks or blocks. He deals 2 damage to the opposing player or a unit or something like that, which triggers Tome of Horrors, which means the opponent discards 2 cards from their deck, which means Kaido deals 2 damage to himself, and that is Kaido dealing damage, and that means Tome of Horrors triggers, mills two more cards, which means Kaido Shadowstep once again hits himself, etc., until he dies. So each trigger just takes a look at whether Kaido dies or not, because for Mastery to be reached and for the opponent to mill a ton of cards, you need to be able to save Kaido Shadowstep. So if you already have Tome of Horrors in play and you play Kaido Shadowstep, usually, well, Kaido will die before he can trigger his Mastery. But if you, for some reason, have Kaido Shadowstep in play and not the Tome of Horrors, and you deal several damage with Kaido Shadowstep, getting his Mastery counter up to 7, 8, or 9, and then you play Tome of Horrors, well, then crazy stuff appears. And I have a short video of when I was testing out the card interaction that I'm going to show you right now. Usually when I'm trying to test some card interactions, there is a great way of doing that, and that is the Into Shadow campaign and the Azindel fight. Because in this one you are starting off at 50 power. The opponent has a ton of health, you have a ton of health, you have access to all the colors, so if you want to test any and all interactions, you can. If you have the Into Shadow campaign, this is where you do it. Like literally, this is how you do it. And in this one, I wanted to show you what happens, because I was not able to do this inside a game because it is quite difficult. I'm going to show you what happens if you can get several points of mastery on Kaido himself before playing Tome of Horrors. And this initial hand in this mission tutorial can tell you that much. So first I'm playing Kaido, well, playing Current Merchant to... No, whatever. Playing this one even. This really doesn't matter. So playing Current and Merchant, getting getting just Tome of Horrors from my market, playing Kaido Shadow Step, but not playing Tome of Horrors yet, otherwise it's just a done deal. Playing Solitude for 3, just to proc him slightly, because Malaise, and I'm gonna get to that in the later part of the video, Malaise is the only fast spell effect that can mill cards on your opponent's turn, unless you are dealing damage with your units during an opponent's turn and you have Tome of Horrors in play, but this is not the way to do it. So Kaido right now has 3 points of mastery on him. End of turn, I'm going to play Malaise on the opponent, get Kaido's mastery up to 9. Because milling 6 cards, dealing 6 points of damage. Next turn, because well, in this moment you're just checking if Kaido has at least 7. Was it? Yes, at least 7 points of damage on points of mastery on himself. You get to play Tome of Horrors. I am giving him Xenon Initiation so I can just killer that 1/1. Kaido will deal 3 damage, so I will mill the opponent for 3, getting Kaido's mastery up to 12. Kaido will then once again mill for 3, deal 3 damage to himself, achieve his mastery, mill the opponent for 27 cards, deal 27 damage to himself, killing himself, and then the last trigger of Tome of Horrors goes for the remaining 27 cards. So this is when I was playing with Kaido Shadow Step before, that something else happened usually. Mainly, so far when I was playing with Kaido Shadow Step in the Expedition format pre-Tome of Horrors, pre-Promises by Firelight, it was like, okay, so I am able to trigger Kaido's Mastery to the enemy player discards each card in their deck that shares the name of a card in their void, but they still usually were left with like 10 or 15 cards in their deck. But when you have Tome of Horrors, and you use Kaido's Mastery ability, and you are milling the opponent for like half their deck, then Kaido deals damage to himself. That triggers Tome of Horrors for one last time, and you are decking them for the remaining half, more often than not. But this takes some finesse, and this is not usually the kill method in this deck, but it is something very hard to set up, but it is something that allows you to kill your opponent just like willy-nilly. And I do believe there is potential for making a pure Kaido Shadow Step Tome of Horrors combo to mill the opponent's deck and with just these 2 cards with some small support. But this is more like a mid-range, straight-out Millstome deck. Just seeing how much we can squeeze out of Tome of Horrors. Okay, that is it for units. We've already talked about Tome of Horrors and its interactions with, I believe, almost all the units that are in this deck. So we need to follow it up with some pieces of removal, like 4 copies of Permafrost, with 4 copies of Devouring Shadow, and this is a Shadow heavy deck. It has 20 out of 25 power sources are Shadow, which means Devouring Shadow usually just decimates any unit the opponent can play. And we also have 4 copies of In Cold Blood with the added bonus of this 4-cost double Shadow spell, that if you are killing a Justice unit, the enemy player discards each copy from their hand and deck. They cannot leave the void. You lose all Justice influence, but there is no Justice in this deck, fortunately. So this is sometimes, on occasion, an additional source of milling, but do not count on this. 2 pieces of Seek Power just to get the power count up to 27, and 4 copies of Malaise. Now, Malaise plays a funny role because in this deck, because it is, well, just a big source of milling, that is A, and B, with Heartstopper or Kaido Shadow Step in play, this gives you an active way of proccing milling on your opponent's turn. Because, for example, Heartstopper says the first time the enemy player discards a card each turn, draw it. So you can play Heartstopper. You can, for example, mill the opponent with just playing a power off of Mournful Deathcap. You get a card from the opponent, but on your opponent's turn, you also have a window of proccing Heartstopper. So if you keep Malaise in your hand, and I would advise you to keep Malaise in your hand more often than just play it out on turn 2, at least in this deck, you get to draw one of those cards to your hand as well. We finish it off with 25 pieces of power. Most of these are sigils, with the obvious inclusion of Felon Insignias and Seats of Cunning. I am not running any emblems here because I want to go much higher on power, especially with Tome of Horrors just hopefully being used each turn from mid-game onwards. Now, for the market, I included the usual Edict of Makar piece of removal for this spell market, the 1-cost shadow spells that kills a time or a justice unit. We have a copy of Reread if you want to reread your melees or one of your removals, or you are missing power, or you already have gotten an Edict of Makar or a Solitude and you want to get that back. But this is honestly a flex slot. You can use almost anything in this one. Next up we have Aramod's Designs, a 2-cost shadow spell that says kill each unit with cost 2 or less, and has been named the death of all aggro, but is not, at least not yet to my knowledge. You can include this, or you can include a Malediction in your deck, the 4-cost, the 4-cost double shadow spell that says each unit gets -3/-3 this turn. I wanted to test out Aramod's Design so far, but do remember that you are running 12 units that cost 1 or 2 in this deck. This is also one of the reasons why I'm not running any emblems in this one. I mean, maybe emblems of Linrai with Aegis do not care that much about Aramod's Design, but other than that, yeah, I believe you need that to just get through all the Turbo, Combri decks, etc. And next up we have a copy of Daring Griffin, a rather decent follow-up that is a 4-cost double primal flying exalted reckless griffin that says when the enemy player plays a spell, sacrifice this unit to negate it, and then you get to play a 3/2 flying reckless weapon on one of your other units. And finishing things off, we have one copy of Solitude, aka Roland in a Box. 6-cost double shadow spell. The enemy player discards the top card of their deck for each card in their void. Now, I am not including 4 copies of Solitude main deck because A, if I have 4 copies of Blightpath Smuggler main deck, serves the same purpose. And B, Solitude is just a finisher because you want to mill your opponent with probably Kaido Shadow Step or Dream Snatcher with Tome of Horrors, etc., etc. And if you are running just 4 Solitudes main deck and you have an opener with 2 of them, that is just a redraw there and then, like almost always. There could be a matchup where that is a good hand, but more often than not, it is not. This Millstome in its current incarnation is a rather mid-range deck, I would say. Tome of Horrors is a great option, obviously, of milling the opponents, but it also is just a support card for stuff like Bloodseeker, Dream Snatcher, Heartstopper, and Kaido Shadow Step to make them better, to make them bigger, to make them more deadly. And you also have the obvious option of finishing the opponent off with Solitude or a full mastery Kaido Shadow Step with Tome of Horrors in play. If you are able to set that up, that is usually just G and G. Alright, that is enough of the general information about this deck. When it comes to strategy, I believe I will just show you the games that I have pre-recorded. They are mostly slow, not slow, mostly short this time. I don't know why, but that is probably how Expedition looks right now. And hopefully you will get some strategy tips from that part of the video. Alrighty, and this is game 1. And this is an interesting hand with 2 pieces of removal, Kaido, and 4 power. And that is one we could redraw, we could keep. I opted to keep it, to redraw it, but that was a decent keep as well, especially if you knew the opponent had a slow starting hand. And this one is slightly better with a Bloodseeker and a Dream Snatcher. So if we can get Tome of Horrors online quite early, this could be really something amazing. The beginning of a beautiful friendship of the opponent's deck and their void, with one going to the other quite fast indeed. And yes, there is a Tome of Horrors here, but I opted to play Dream Snatcher first for achieving even more synergy, and we also have Devouring Shadow to get rid of the opponent's 2/3 Oni. Emblem of Cottage doesn't do much for us. Mage Breaker kills probably, Dream Snatcher, sure, but we are able even to block here. Next turn, I believe I want to kill the opponent's unit before playing Tome of Horrors. Yes, we can just deal with it. Just deal with it and then attack. Now you can see we are rather the mid-range than the mill, with mill just being a backup. Echo, Inspire Artisan, with being a 2-1. And I opted to go for kind of first before going for Mournful Deathcap and keeping both of my units as blockers. Another copy of Jishu, sure. Now the opponent is going to attack with Echo, and this is a mistake I made. I should have made a double block here, because I knew the opponent had at least one trick, like a Finest Hour or Draw Strength. In this case it was Draw Strength. I don't know why they wanted to decimate, but sure. Maybe they're running a really low curve, but that just made Echo survive this round. Now what I want to do here is first play Mournful Deathcap, and then Primal Sigil, and I believe in this one I played Tome of Horrors first as well, but that just means that Kaido dies a very fast and painful death. Remember, Kaido has to have his mastery at around 7+. Also depends how much damage he's dealing, whether he's buffed in a way or not. Turns out I opted to go slightly slower here because I was still at 23. The opponent did not have any cards in hand because they redrew to 6. And we can block their units right now. They're getting some Blade Breakers up in there. And getting Camo up to 6-4. Heartstopper is an interesting option. You could go in one of many ways, but I opted to go for Heartstopper first. Just checking up on everything. Yeah, those are some big units. And the opponent is attacking with the 6-4. That is why I opted to double block, because they have no cards in hand. I am losing the 2-3 elf. That will soon be much bigger, but I don't care about it right now. And Kaido is getting up there, up to 4-13. I made the mistake of playing Tome of Horrors here first. I should have just played Deathcap and played that. But I believe the opponent does not know about this combination that Kaido kills himself, says well played, and is just surrendering in 3, 2, 1. Oh, it was faster than that even. Let's get on to game number 2. And in this one, this is a pure redraw. I mean, 1 power hand, just get out of here, literally. This is a double Tome of Horror hand with 2 Permafrost. That is, I'm not sure why I kept it, because 2 Permafrost, well, it depends. If you're up against Elysian and they have a Smuggler in hand, those Permafrosts do nothing. On the other hand, Tome of Horrors is such a centerpiece of this deck list that if I have 2, then it is like, this is amazing, just literally amazing. Also, if you have at least 1 primal source in play, each Seek power should go for a shadow, because you have Devouring Shadows in this deck list, and you do not need any more primal than that. So I'm going for Shadow first, playing that one, playing Permafrost on the Dragon. Next turn it could be Tome of Horrors, but with Kaido Shadow Step in play, I am not sure that is the best line of play. Xenon Live Speaker, that's good. Another Xenon Live Speaker, that's redundant. Now, Bloodseeker and Tome of Horrors are a decent combination here, because it means that my Bloodseeker will get much bigger rather sooner than later. The opponent is probably going to buff one of their cultists. No, I remember they're not. They're playing Caleb's Persuader on one of them and attacking us. Right? Is that right, opponent? Does my memory serve me well? Yes. They want to persuade me with my own weapon, but I don't care about this right now. I can just play Kaido Shadow Step next turn and let him kill himself. Or Dream Snatcher and Tome of Horrors number 2. And this is going to be quite interesting, because right now we're attacking for 2. We are milling the opponent for 4 cards. Then we are dealing 1 damage to ourselves, so we are milling the opponent for 2 additional cards. And in the meantime, our Radiant is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And when he deals damage, he's going to mill twice that amount of cards. So the next time he hits, he's going to mill 12 cards from the opponent. and that will make our elf even bigger and mill even more cards. So whether they have chump blockers or not, we do not care. No, we do not. Yep, the opponent saw the writing on the wall right there. In the third one, we have a very good hand with Tome of Horrors, Dream Snatcher, Permafrost, and Heartstopper. Shadow Sigil into Seek Power for blue, but second power should be Dream Snatcher before we play Tome of Horrors. Remember, play units first, play cards like Tome of Horrors, support mill cards like Tome of Horrors and Mournful Deathcap later on in the following turn. So for example, if you have an opening hand with Dream Snatcher and Mournful Deathcap, remember, first you're playing Dream Snatcher, next turn you're playing Deathcap and a power, and you're milling the opponent for 3 then. So right now I could go for the small advantage or for the big advantage, so I could go for Dream Snatcher or Tome of Horrors, the choice is up to me. And I believe I opted to go for Tome of Horrors first to start milling the opponent right here and now. With next turn I could go for another Dream Snatcher, and on turn 4 it is going to be Tome of Horrors, unless I obviously I might want to go for Heartstopper and attacking the opponent with that one. Unfortunately, this source of power is depleted, so we are playing the other Dream Snatcher, attacking the opponent for 4, whether they block or not. We are milling them for 4, and both our units are getting slightly bigger. This looks like the opponent is playing as some sort of a 4-color combo deck in Expedition, which is cool. But will it stand the test of time and mill? I'm not sure, because next turn, if I play Tome of Horrors number 2 and Permafrost a blocker, I will be able to mill the opponent for 12 and 12, and that is already 24, and the opponent sees and knows the writing on the wall, and that is it. That is another game. That is already 3 games down. Okay, I hope this game, and I know that this game is going to be slightly longer. And there is a small problem with this hand. If the opponent is running Shadow, if the opponent is running Eremot's Design and they have it in their hand or in their market and a Smuggler in hand, this hand can just get decimated. And that is the beauty of Eremot's Design, if I have to be honest. But right here, right now, we have a Dream Snatcher on 2. We have Mournful Deathcap and Power on 3, and given that, I have no idea whether people are running those Eremot's Designs as 4-off's main deck in their Shadow decks or not, or just maybe in the market or not at all. I'm just willing, at the beginning of a new season I would call it, I'm just willing to just run everything onto the board and just go with it. So yes, I am literally going with it here. Milling Sodi, and this looks like a 3-color deck, probably a Curse Control or a Curse deck. I mean, one or the other, or a Decimate deck could be also that. Now, what can we get here? Can we get... no. This also, I remember, was an interesting option because I milled the opponent first. The opponent had like 8 cards or something like that in their void, but not as many for Bloodseeker to be big, so 9. And they blocked Bloodseeker, so this is where Malaise is an instant +2/+2 to my Bloodseeker. They had 8, now they have 14, which A, makes Dream Snatcher bigger mid-attack, but also makes Bloodseeker bigger mid-attack. So yes, Malaises are here because they are fast. More than because they just mill a good amount for a small amount of a good amount of cards for a small amount of power. And this Tome of Horrors here is even more perfect because right now we are just milling the opponent for 3, attacking the opponent with these 2 units here. Sure, they can defy one, probably the bigger one, yes, but we are still dealing 4 damage, and even if they get Chump Blocker after Chump Blocker after Chump Blocker, we are still milling them for 4 now, and for 1 at the end of our turn. Now, this is mid-game, and this is where the second option on Tome of Horrors shines, really shines, because starting next turn, we can just pay 4, get a card, pay 4, get a card, pay 4, get a card. What if we... so what if we need to kill the opponent using their own cards? That just means that, opponents, why are you hitting yourself? And sometimes that is even more fun, isn't it? Alright, so let's get a Tome of Horrors in here, or let's get a Permafrost that we can already play on their unit, sure. Why not? Now the opponent already has 25 cards in their deck and 40 cards in their... 25 cards in their void, 40 cards in their deck. They are playing this one, the Griffin Outcast, which... yeah, they're just gonna Aegis it. The curse that they played on us is a slight nuisance. Oh, they're negating it and stealing that and cannot play it, but it goes to their void, which means they have more cards in their void. And right now, given that I can pay 4 to draw a card from the opponent's deck, so I am technically able to draw at least 2 cards each turn, I am opting to play out my whole hand because I will be needing everything. So yeah, fortunately, they did not have any follow-ups here, but we do have 2 Curses of Loneliness on ourselves. So yeah, we right now probably need a Smuggler to just get the opponent off of anything. Well, Avigraph doesn't do much, because if we can get Solitude from our market, it is GG. So yeah, Korosh Sees All makes it so that there is a timer on us. And right now I am just opting to play out the Malaise at the end of the opponent's turn. Because right now it is full on mill mode. Kind of Shadow Step is going to mill them for some cards, but they have 36, we have 27 here. I opted to steal a card from their hand, and so it happens it is a Shadow X Smuggler that allows us to get a Solitude, and I'm just hoping the opponent doesn't have any negates in their hand. They are playing a Smuggler of their own, so right now I'm hoping they are not getting any negates. I mean, they don't have Felrog's Choice in their hand. That would have been slightly bad, I would say. So right now I'm just hoping the opponent doesn't have any stops for this one, and we can mill them for the remaining 36, or rather less cards from their deck, and yes, a mill achieved. Let's get on to the last game now. Alrighty, and this is a good hand, a very good hand. It is a Bloodseeker into Mournful Deathcap with 2 pieces of removal as well. So this one should be good. Alright, so that is the Elf. Fire Sigil Oni Patrol, that's good because we already have a blocker, and there is a Tome of Horrors here as well, but I cannot play both Tome of Horrors and Mournful Deathcap on the same... I mean, if I had a dual power, I would play Tome of Horrors this turn, because that's already milling the opponent for 1, and I would play Deathcap and a power on the following turn, but unfortunately that was not to be. So right now, if the opponent attacks, we are still blocking with the 2-3. Varret Hero in Training, that is a good card to just get rid of with Devouring Shadow, but I opted to go for Tome of Horrors and Permafrost on that one, and just attacking, because remember, all damage dealing with this one is also milling the opponent. So we are dealing 2 to them, but we are also milling them for 2. At the end of their turn, we are milling them for 1. Also dealing 1 damage to ourselves. We just want to make this Bloodseeker much bigger. That is the goal right here, right now. So on the one hand, Mournful Deathcap is a threat to them because we can turn each of our power into mill 3 effects, but also Bloodseeker is mill 3 each turn. So that is also a very dangerous instrument in our hands. And right now I just want to play a power. I could Devouring Shadow here, or I could steal a card from the opponent, and I believe I should have stolen a card from the opponent's deck here and just left my unit for blocks. But yeah, we have a 4-5 in play already, and we can start, as usual, just getting rid of drawing cards from the opponent's deck. There's another Tome of Horrors, but we don't need a second one right now. We need some more cards, even if it's just power. Oh, Teething Whelp, sure, that's a unit. And even if we're not attacking, even if we're keeping this one on defense, we are still milling the opponent. So that is a good place to be, I would say. And we are still at a hefty 20 health. We do have 4 life stealers in this deck, and we have some options of finishing the game off with one fell swoop with usually Smuggler for Solitude in the market. Once again, I don't think I want to run Solitude's main deck here. Anyway, they're running their Varret in here, which means we are milling the opponent for 4 once again. That is good. Hunter's Shot. And I remember this one because this is Hunter's Shot with Onslaught, so we know that the opponent on top of their deck has a Hellhound, and we are just stealing that Hellhound. So thank you, Traveler. I'm usually not emoting, but this was really the occasion for thanking the opponent. I believe at least, because that Hellhound is a 4/4 with charge. That is quite cheap, so I can go Dream Snatcher, Tome number 2, Hellhound, charge with the Hellhound, hopefully deal the 4 damage somewhere, mill the opponent for 8 cards, make our Dream Snatcher much bigger, hopefully, and starting next turn we can play Teething Whelp and steal a card and do some other stuff. All the time, dealing damage with their own units, probably ones that we are getting. Now it was without... Now this one was without Onslaught, fortunately for the opponent. But we do have another Dream Snatcher. So we can go Dream Snatcher, steal a card. Maybe it's a power, maybe it's not a power. It's a char, even better. And attack the opponent for 4. Yes, we are killing them with damage, but we also have our secondary win condition because the opponent is down to 28 cards now. So whatever happens, as long as we keep playing units, and we can keep playing units, for example, from the top of the opponent's deck, and just chump block and just play Sunset Priest and just kill their Oni and just attack and just do a ton of things. So even though we are getting the opponent down to 9, there is the second prong of the assault, milling them for 4, for 3 more, playing a Teething Whelp. We have 9 damage in play already. They are at 9. They have only 15 cards left in their deck, so even if they just play 3 blockers now, 3 blockers next turn, we are still milling them whatever happens. And yes, it is another game that has been won by this mid-range mill deck. Now let's get back on top, up top rather, and talk about the deck list once again. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, Millstome and Eternal Expedition. The build around Tome of Horrors. That is a really delightful mill card. I mean, also there is a menacingly looking Yeti stealing Lys's tome, or at least trying to. Yes, you gotta remember that this is only the early stages of this deck. I did not play a ton of games with it. It probably can be perfected by a lot. For example, by getting a better market here. I'm not sure. Daring Griffin and Reread are good cards for this market at least. There is a world where Solitudes could be included main deck, but I do believe that with the inclusion of Tome of Horrors, you are just enabling or powering up your Bloodseekers, Dream Snatchers, Heartstoppers, and kind of Shadow Steps by a mile. I also believe there could be another build of this deck specifically around kind of Shadow Step and Tome of Horrors, just milling the opponent in the way that I have shown you at the beginning of this video. Alright, this will be it for this deck check video. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed yourselves here. And remember, if you have any questions about this deck list or any other deck list, just leave them in the comments below. I am reading them as often as is required and is possible. I would also like to thank the sponsors of this video, TeamRankstar.com, your best source for all strategy guides and articles about card games such as Eternal, Teppen, Mythgard, Hearthstone, Magic the Gathering, and Gwent. Yes, I remember them now. I would also like to thank Inked Gaming, Customize Your Game with Your Style, Acquire, and OP Seat. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Calebovitsch out, and see you next week.